We are live. Welcome, everyone.
Hi,
Good,
good
good,
evening, Al.
yeah, good evening to you. I mean, we as happens often, we have spent hours planning this discussion, Rosemary. I don't think people understand how many hours we take planning these discussions sometimes. But I hope that everybody has a positive attitude and appreciates how long it takes for us to plan these sessions.
Okay.
Welcome to Everybody's Attitude and welcome, Rosemary.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hi, Al. Great to be doing another Everything is Attitude show. It is true that very often I'll think of something, or Al will think of something, a subject that we think might be a good discussion topic, or we get people who write in who think it's a good discussion topic, as with this week, when do we sacrifice and when do we not? uh what is sacrifice? What does sacrificing yourself, or what does the sacrifice of others mean to us? And as I suggested this to Al yesterday, Al reminded me that in America, uh, and it is an American holiday. Let's stress that. It's not something that is celebrated around the world, or I'm not sure celebrated is the right word, remembered around the world, but it is Memorial weekend this weekend, and it's Memorial Day. I do believe it's on Monday.
Yes.
And so we thought we would bring that into the topic as well. But I'm just going to kick off then,
Sounds good.
because although I mentioned it to Al yesterday, and Al saying we spent hours and hours planning this, it's not actually true, because both of us being really, really busy and doing lots of other things, we very often come together, maybe as in today's uh, event, 5 minutes before we go on air, which sometimes means we're a couple of minutes late going on. But and I'll say to Al, as I did today, what's the subject? Because even though it was my suggestion, I'm thinking I'm thinking, because I've been busy doing so
Beaufort
many other
Albert
things.
Jester was the
Oh,
36th governor of Texas,
sorry.
serving from 1947 until his death in office in 1949.
Okay then.
So I have no idea what Alexa answered, but
That was Alexa. I don't know where she is or what she's doing, but anyway, she's interfering and being nosy in our discussion here. But I was saying to Al, why did I suggest this? And then I have to think back as to the reason why I've suggested it. And so in the end, I said to Al tonight, let's just go on air and do it, and just let's talk, just as if we're not even on air, and as if other people are not listening in and not watching, because that, I think that makes for a very spontaneous and a good show. We like to listen to each other, don't we, Al? Whether anybody else likes to listen to
as long as we like to hear each other talk, I think that's the only thing that matters, right? No, everybody matters. Everybody who listens to this matters.
So I think that the reason I was thinking about this is, you know, um, we were talking on Thursday morning about pain and how much we suffer through pain and heartache. And we were talking about the gift of pain. And I know that it sounds really weird, but um, pain is such a gift to us. It's not a gift that we want necessarily, but it is a gift nevertheless. And sacrifice brings with it its own kind of pain. I think most parents will understand sacrifice, because don't we all sacrifice ourselves in some way or another? Some of us in a bigger way than others, but don't we sacrifice ourselves for our children? We of course it's I was going to say it's our choice to have children. It's not always our choice to have children, but those of us who choose, we choose to have children. We don't necessarily understand how much of a sacrifice we're necessarily going to have to make, because our lives get put on hold because we do sacrifice time, effort, energy, and so on for our children. But of course, we know them, we love them, they are ours. So, to sacrifice for them it's a very easy thing to do. And of course, all children give us pain and heartache at some point or another for whatever reason. But they are our gift, and it's easy when it's our kids, it's easy for us to see that the pain is a gift, and it's easy for us to see that sacrifice is, something that, even though we may not like it, it's something that we have to do. But especially with parenthood, there are so many people out there who are not even sure when the sacrifice for their children should stop. When does the kid stand on his own 2 feet? When do you stop giving him pocket money? Actually, when do you stop supporting him or her? When is the sacrifice? When should it be over? At what point in your life should it be over, or should it never be over? Should we continue to sacrifice our lives, our wants, our needs for our children? What do you think, Al? You've got 3 of them. You've got 3 children now. What do you think?
I think in my mind, I know that this is going to the amount of times I have to actively sacrifice for my kids is going to go down as they get older. Inevitably,
Who told you that? Who told you that?
I'm saying, I think like
Oh,
as
boy.
far as like day to day stuff more, right? So, but inevitably the sacrifice, like once you sign a dotted line and have a child, nothing comes before for you anymore, right? I mean, that's the deal in my mind, and it's a lifetime of sacrifice, no matter what. Like their needs are above my needs, no matter what. And I know there has to be a happy medium because you have to be happy too, right? But
it's such a we sort of get into the habit of it, don't we? That we get into the habit of putting the kids first. I mean, should it always be that way, or should there be a point when we have to stop? And I'm looking at my daughter, who is a mother herself. I mean, it seems to continue in some part, in a different way. It seems to continue whether you've got kids or grandkids, and when the grandkids come along, it's not exactly that you're sacrificing anymore, but you are certainly putting your children and your grandchildren before you put yourself. When does it stop? How does it stop? How can we get out of the habit of those kinds of sacrifices, first of all?
yeah, I mean, I think there has to, like, as you sacrifice things, and I guess there's a scale of sacrifice too. I mean, are we talking about a child that as they grow older they're irresponsible and they don't work and they don't do anything, or are we talking about someone who one of your children who has an ailment or got really sick or lost a job suddenly and may lose their house? Those are the kind of things I think you look at rationally, and you'd never want your child out on the street because of circumstances or illness or anything like that. So I think it matters what kind of what scenario that they're in, and are they someone who's trying? Are they someone who's making good decisions? And then if they are, and things come into play, and it means either you are in a good or a worse place, or your child is in a good or a bad place. You want your child to be in a good place, and maybe you're not in as good a place, but you're like, my role as a dad is always going to be to make sure they're standing on their own 2 feet, no matter what it is. But it also is my role is to make sure they're independent enough and they're smart enough and they're savvy enough to be able to take care of themselves and make it so that I don't have to sacrifice so much that it hurts me, right? So I think that's the fine line.
Right. But you mentioned kids who are sick. You mentioned, and now we get into a sort of the bigger area. If we have a spouse who is sick, if we have a loved one, even a friend who is sick, we're getting into the sort of, if you like, the larger sacrifices that people make, which can, and the sacrifice is often that you give your life, and not necessarily that you die for someone else, but you give your life, your enjoyment, your independence. It's, it's obviously one of those shows.
Yeah, seriously. I mean,
Hi Alexa, and your phone. But I mean, you know, there are people out there who they literally sacrifice their life, their enjoyment, they have no free time, and they do it very often with a sense of you know, very, some people do it because they feel guilty if they don't. That, for instance, you know, taking care of aged parents, taking care of, you know, the grandmother who lives next door, who, you know, demands so much of your time that you don't have a life for yourself. I mean, there are so many different types of sacrifice, and each of those sacrifices, I think, small or large, can create, if you allow them to, they can create a great deal of pain and a great deal of heartache for the person who is making the sacrifice. The ultimate sacrifice, of course, Memorial Day is coming up, and I automatically, when anything has to do with, you know, focusing on those people who keep us safe, those people in the military, the police force, or all of those people that, you know, nurses and doctors who work tirelessly for their patients. There are lots of, you know, different ways that people sacrifice, but I immediately go to my father, who was a professional soldier all of his life. The only reason he left the army, because he was an army man all of his life. When we were kids, you know, whereas other kids were chanting nursery rhymes, we would go around the garden marching, left, left. I had a good home and I left. And my father would sort of teach us these things because we were, you know, we were military kids, we were army kids. And he sacrificed a very great deal. And of course, we know that many other people in the military sacrifice their lives, and there's no greater sacrifice than to sacrifice your life for the sake of others. And the most amazing part of it is that so many soldiers sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their lives, sacrifice their home life, sacrifice possibilities of families for total strangers. But let's go back to the point of when we're sacrificing, we have a loved one, we have children, we have whoever it is that we are, people who are dependent on us, and we're making our sacrifices and giving up our lives and our independence to, you know, so that we can give to these people who are dependent on us. There has to be, as far as I can see, there has to be. I know people might take this the wrong way when I say this, but there has to be an element, I think, of selfishness, because otherwise, you know, if you don't have self-preservation, and call it selfishness if you like, but that's what I'm saying, a little bit of being selfish, a little bit of taking care of yourself, a little bit of being able to say no sometimes, a little bit of finding someone else to come and babysit for, you know, whoever it is that you're taking care of, finding that moment, even if it's only once a month, have something that you do that takes you out of the environment that you're in. I know that I have a client whose son has been in a wheelchair and disabled for most of his life. And so I'm going sort of 12, 14 years. She is entirely given over to her life, to that child, and to supporting the child and to making sure he's okay and so on. And that is such a huge sacrifice. She does not see it as a sacrifice. She sees it as something that, as a mother, she just wants to do. She needs to make sure that her son he's fine, that he's good. But I did actually, having talked to her at some point, I did convince her, as along with some other friends of hers, that as much as you want to be with this boy 24/7, it's not healthy for you. And if you crack and you're not able to take care of this child, who is going to do it for you? So it's sometimes that little bit of selfishness that is necessary for you to salvage your health and to salvage your emotional state. The same as parents who don't go out. They never have a babysitter. I never had a babysitter for Samantha. I was, very protective, and but I'm not sure that it's a good thing to sacrifice yourself completely for your children. You have to make time for yourself as well, for your own peace of mind, for your own emotional health, and also for your own physical health.
Yeah, Nettie has a great comment. She says, if you do it from your heart or love, is it sacrifice? It's a really great question. And it goes to the intention of sacrifice too, the why of sacrifice, right? I mean, a lot of times when people are sacrificing, it's because they have to, right? And it's almost not even thought of, because it's either their obligation or they feel like it's their obligation. I think I was talking about a friend of mine whose husband is chronically ill. He's got congestive heart failure. She has a slew of health issues herself, but I was talking to her today, and I was like, how do you do that? Like she said it's really hard, and I go home and I collapse and I'm exhausted, but it's what she said, till death do us part, and this is who else but me, and I don't think about it, I just do it. And I think a lot of times sacrifice, and the example you gave with your friend that has a disabled child, I think a lot of sacrifice it happens like that, where it's almost like your instincts kick in. But the danger of that is, like what you said, your instincts kick in and you're doing what you need to do to sacrifice for your children or a loved one. And how often do you hear somebody taking care of somebody chronically ill, and the person that's taking care of them passes away, or something tragic happens to them, and it's just what you're saying. They're not giving, and probably a big part of our recipe, right, for sacrifice is to make sure that you're whole in what you're doing, and you're what you always say to me, feeding your soul, right, and making sure that you're good enough to be able to support whoever needs that support.
I knew a couple many years ago. He was in a wheelchair. No, sorry, she was in the wheelchair, and her husband would take her in the wheelchair all over the place. He'd take her for walks along the cliff tops. He'd take her for walks in the small town that they were in. He would, on a sunny day, you'd see them in the park, even in the rain and the snow. And they actually lived in a town where it was sort of lots of hills. And so and they lived sort of halfway up this hill. There was a street that you went right up this hill, and they lived halfway up this hill. And of course, every day he would come to take her down the hill, wheel her back up the hill. But also there were hills in other places. Go to this shop, you'd have to go up this slope, or and so on. So but without fail. And his wife was disabled very early on in their marriage, so he probably had a good 20-30 years of pushing her about in the wheelchair. And of course she had gotten steadily worse, so she completely relied on him for everything. And he was almost possessive of his role. I'll see to it, it's fine, I'll do this for her. He would not allow other people to help. He was the one who took her here, there, and everywhere, and he was the one who took care of her. And at some point, walking up the hill one day, he dropped dead. That was it. That was it. And consequently, she then, had to go into a care facility. Um, had he been a little more willing, perhaps, to have people help him, had he been a little bit more willing to allow people to come into his life, who knows? Maybe his heart wouldn't have been so strained. Maybe he would have, been able to cope better. The same as, I know that, we don't, as parents, we don't see that we're making sacrifices for our children, but nevertheless, if you step back and you look at what the things that you do for them and the things that you give up for them, it is a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice that that we feel necessarily as, we're making this sacrifice for them. It's a willing thing that we do, but nevertheless, we are. If it's them or if it's us, we choose it's them. So we are sacrificing what we want to do. Sometimes we are just taking a step back. We're taking, we're putting ourselves second or third or whatever it is for our children. But again, with these kinds of sacrifices, we can get so bogged down with our children. We can get so frustrated with the fact that we're always having to make decisions for them, especially when they're younger. For single parents, that has got to be such a tough place to be, because it's so hard if you're a single parent and you don't have anyone else to share the burden with. It's not that you don't want to put the child to bed all by yourself. It would be nice to have someone to. You don't want somebody else to put them to bed. It's nice to have that shared, experience. And when you're a single parent, you don't have that, not nearly as much. So, what should we do with these sacrifices? Of course, we have our military. We have every time a policeman goes out on the street, he's potentially sacrificing something of himself, because you never know what's around the corner, do you? You could say that with all of us, but when you put on a uniform and you say, okay, I'm going to be doing my best for this group of people here or that group of people there. When you go into the army, people know what they're going into. We know the world is war torn. We know that the chances of, when we go into the army, we know the chances of potentially, being in a war zone at some point or another. So we make choices and we make decisions there. And when we make the choice or the decision to go into that, or actually making the choice to do, is we're making the choice to potentially risk our own lives for all that we believe in: freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of actions. We are making that choice to uphold the law. We're making that choice to potentially put ourselves in danger for the sake of often complete and utter strangers. But even then, I think we have to have a healthy attitude. We have to have a way that we can, let's say, take a break, take a breath. We have to have that moment of being able to feed our soul, and sometimes just learning to say no. I'm busy right now as far as the kids are concerned. Or when we have someone who's dependent on us, there are so many places. I get people calling me all the time and emailing me all the time. I'm taking care of my aged mother. It's a 24/7 job. I'm really, really exhausted. Can you tell me, what I can do? Well, in almost every town and village, there's a church. And in almost every town and village, there's some sort of government institution where you can go and say, help. In England, certainly, we have places where people can go. They'll actually come and pick up the aged parent, take them to the community centre, give them a couple of hours, take them back. Great for I think it's great for the parent, great for even for the children. If you've got a number of children and you can't always see to them all, call someone up. Do you mind if they go to the park with you today? Or call an institution. The Salvation Army is great for this kind of thing. Call someone and say, I just need help. And it's not, yes, it's great for the people that you're caring for, but it's also great for you because it's something that you need. And unfortunately, I think that the people who are the most willing to make the sacrifices are those people who are reluctant to ask for help. For whatever reason, maybe they feel guilty, maybe they feel it's their responsibility, maybe they feel that they should always be there. So those people who are willing to make these sacrifices are usually the most selfless. So when I'm saying be a little selfish, I'm saying, pay attention to your own health as well, pay attention to your emotional self, pay attention to your own emotional needs.
Yeah, I think being or those who are trying to be selfless, it does go against the grain for them, right? It is a challenge to be selfish when your basic mindset is to be selfless, like that. And yeah. you do see that with a lot of people. And if there is another ingredient, and maybe it's not for the person who's making a sacrifice, but all of us who see people making sacrifices, an ingredient is, you see, and people love to politicize, the military and the police and all this stuff. But the bottom line with all these people that are putting their lives on the line, I don't care if you are a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, Republican.
Politics don't come into it.
Politics don't come into it, or should not come into it, because the reality is these folks are sacrificing, or if someone's sacrificing for a loved one, hey, that's a great thing that you're doing. Do you need help? Hey, that's a wonderful thing you're doing. I know there's a service that can help, alleviate some of the burden. You need to take care of yourself as well. You see a police officer, man or woman police officer, hey, it doesn't hurt to say thank you for doing what you do. You're putting your life on the line, and I just appreciate what you do. It's not gonna. There's no police officer or military personnel that you're gonna say that to, and they're gonna be like, I can't believe he said that. That's really mean. I mean, they're gonna either be kind of okay, and that's great, or really love it, right? It's not gonna be a bad thing if you do that.
Unfortunately, it happens rarely because I think so many of us, it's not that we mean to, but we just forget to say thank you. We forget to acknowledge those people who are taking care of our safety. And quite frankly, whether you are a person who believes in war or whether you're a person who is against war, the fact remains that there are people out there fighting. Whether you think they've got a good cause or not, they are fighting for our liberty and our freedom. And so why not say thank you? I don't necessarily agree with the war, but thank you for putting yourself in danger on my behalf. I mean, I don't think politics should come into any of this. Do we have any comments going on out there?
Well, you have a couple of people with comments. Beth, in regard to taking time for yourself and making sacrifices for your kids, says, yes, that's why me and my husband always took a few days and would go off for a few days once a year. With 3 kids, you would need your time, it's especially if you have like I go through that too. I have a great time with my kids, and it's hard for me to break away from my kids. But as I get older, and with a push from a good friend of mine, maybe my co-host, maybe I'm starting to realize that it's healthy to step away, and they'll be okay, and it's good for me and my wife to do those things. And in fact, we're doing it for our 25th anniversary coming up, so we're looking forward to doing something, at least for a day or two. Nettie Lori says, as a single parent, it was a remarkable gift. My son taught me my true strength. He was my path to freedom, talking about single parenthood. Um, Andrea, not our Andrea, but another Andrea nonetheless. This is a great subject to cover, very poignant at the moment. Lori also says, amazing what we can face and fight for our children that we left undone, where we actually needed, but in the face of our own needs, but wouldn't stand 1 second for in what our child needed. And she said, I walked through fire for my son. So the sacrifices I think that people make, like you said, for your children, I think it is easy for most. I guess probably not everybody would make a which probably should get their.
Al, I can assure you, you think it's going to get easier as they get older, and I'm here to tell you, you are so mistaken. Because it gets tougher, because the decisions get tougher, because
and you're not in their lives as much too, right?
No, but there's also this dilemma of, well, shouldn't they be? Aren't they old enough now to make these decisions for themselves? And if they got themselves in a hole, I shouldn't just pull them out. I might be able to give them some advice, but they need to learn how to get out of the hole themselves. And let me tell you, sometimes it's really a juggling act, because you want to help them, but you know you shouldn't, but you want to help them because they're your kids, but you know you shouldn't, and so on and so forth. And I'm coming from that place of, I'm an extremely protective parent and grandparent. But I'm also, as a healer, I have, many patients, and I've often had people come up to me and say, if ever I'm sick, I want you as my advocate. I want you to take care of me, because if I'm taking care of someone else, and I know that many people listening to this will understand and appreciate this, because as you just said, and as Laurie's just said, I think it was Laurie, when you're doing this for someone else, it's very easy to be doing the right thing, to stand up, to say to those people who you think are harming or being difficult around the people you're trying to protect. It's very easy to say, certainly for me, to stand up and say, no, no, this is not how you're going to behave. You're going to treat this person as they should be treated. I mean, I've gone into many a hospital ward and rousted the doctor or rousted the nurse because they weren't doing their job. I've done it. I did it with my daughter, but I've also done it with patients as well. And I think that when people in authority, whether it's doctors, nurses, whoever it is that you're dealing with, when they realize that a person has an advocate, a strong advocate, then they're going to be more careful in their treatment of this person. But in doing that, if you like, I don't see it as a sacrifice necessarily, but I am making a sacrifice. I'm making a stand. I'm sacrificing maybe even my reputation, because those people who I have to tackle sometimes in order to be defensive of my patients and to be defensive of my children. I mean, I get raised eyebrows. There are people out there who think that I'm a really horrible person. Well, if you're going to mistreat someone that I'm taking care of, I will be a horrible person to you. So, but with our children, it's easier for us to defend them than ever it is for us to take care of ourselves. But I think it's very important. We should really, really focus. And as you said, Al, when we know of a neighbor who's struggling, we know of a friend who's struggling, we know of, I come across this all the time because I am a healer, and I run a healing organization for many years. So I've seen this all the time, where people will sacrifice, and you say to them, look, I'm going to come in and sit with him or her. I'm going to come in for a couple of hours, and I want you to, you can go to bed and go to sleep, or go out and enjoy yourself. And it just requires, some people can't ask. Some people don't know how to ask. Some people don't want someone else coming in because they're very, they may be too protective, maybe a little bit controlling even of the people that they're caring for. But if you're a friend or a good neighbor, you stand there and you say, you know what, I'm going to come in here. If you want to sit and chat with me for 2 hours, that's fine. But if you want to go off and do something by yourself, that's also fine.
Yeah.
We need as a society to be able to look at these people. We know that if we know that the family across the street have a soldier out in wherever, Afghanistan or wherever, don't just wave, just go over and say, can I take care of the kids for you? Do you want to go out for the night or something? I mean, I think we should be more proactive as a society in helping those people who do make the sacrifices, and also the single parents. We all know if there's a person in our neighborhood as a single parent, then don't be afraid to just step in and say, anytime you want a babysitter, and don't just leave it in the air, but go back and say again, I offered to babysit. How about Friday? I can come in on Friday, or just put yourself forward a little bit, because people are very often afraid. They're afraid to ask for help, or they don't want to ask for help because they feel it's their responsibility.
Yeah. Time, Rosemary. Can you hear me? Laurie said I was choppy. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, you were a little bit, but you're fine.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the ultimate, like, time is one of those things that is limited for any human being, right? So the giving of your time is a pretty good sacrifice to make. And how many times have you heard, "Oh, I don't have any time," or I think most people have the time to do exactly what we're talking about. Most people have the time, and can sacrifice watching one or two TV shows, or going and doing a leisurely activity for the third or fourth or fifth time during the week. I think most people have time to sacrifice for others who have a lot less time, or making consistent sacrifices for their loved one, for our country, or whatever country you're from, or the law enforcement. Like, they're making a ton of sacrifices. So if you have to make a little bit of a sacrifice in your own time to help those who are really making major sacrifices.
Even if it's just in your own backyard. I had a neighbor. She's passed now, but she was in her early 90s when I moved here, and and I was the only neighbor who would go to her and say, I'm going to the grocery store, and she'd always say to me, yeah, can you bring me some milk, or can you bring me some? Always. Not because she needed the milk, not because she needed the bread, but because she knew I would have to bring it back. And then she would invite me in. And I knew this and there were times when I really did not have the time. Sometimes, to be very honest, I didn't have the inclination either. I mean, I sometimes just wanted to sit and read, or just sit and watch TV or something, just to chill out by myself. And the idea of having to, go to the neighbor and entertain and talk to her and listen to her and so on. It's not an easy thing to do always. But if you think about the gift that you're giving to them, by sacrificing your energy, and many times as a healer, I would be called out, to this patient or that patient. And sometimes I might have just walked through the door after a busy day. I've sat down, not even had any dinner yet, and someone would call, there's an emergency. And we have this with our doctors, we have this with our caregivers. And I would sit down, it might be 10, 11 o'clock at night, and the phone would ring and somebody would have an emergency. Can you come to this hospital or that hospital? And I'm not saying, I mean, I'd love to think, that I'm saintly enough to immediately say, of course I'm going. I mean, there were times when I'd cringe. There were times when I would drive there really not happy to drive because I was tired myself. But when you do it, when you make these sacrifices for people, I can tell you that it's worth it, because you might be giving to somebody else, but at the end of the day, you're feeding your soul, you're giving to yourself.
Yeah,
And
Rosemary, it's that exponential effect. You throw a positive energy out there, and right, you always say it exponentially comes back. And while you don't do it for that reason, right? That's not, you don't say, I'm going to do it just so I get paid back. Um,
well, you don't, because you often don't get that payback from that person. It might come later in a different way.
you may never know where it's coming from, why it's coming from, but it will come back in other ways, and it does. Like, I mean, who out there would say that, something simple like opening a door for somebody doesn't make you feel good? It makes you feel good. Helping someone in need that's making these sacrifices selfishly makes you feel good, right? It feeds your soul because you feel like you're contributing, or helping someone in need, or helping someone who's making, like we were talking about, these major sacrifices. It feels good to do that, and it should, because you're doing the right thing, right?
But so many, yes, but so many times you're making a sacrifice, for whether it's small or large, whatever sacrifice it is, but that sacrifice will bring such a great deal of pain and heartache, uh, either to you, to your family, whoever it is. And this is where I think the gift comes in. I'm going to tell you a brief story about a patient of mine. She was involved in a severe accident, um, and she lost the sight in one eye, and potentially, I mean, her face was completely smashed in, and she was actually a client of me. She would come to me something like once a year, for consultations, and anyway, this particular time she was in an accident, and her husband called me before he even called anyone else, certainly not his families. He called me, and I was sort of first there at the hospital, and she was in a very bad way, completely bandaged. Her face was bandaged, severe head injuries, and so all sorts of different things. And they being the doctors, had already told the husband that the likelihood of her getting her sight, or having her sight back, was low. The chances were very low that she would have a sight. And as a healer going in, I just don't listen to any of that stuff. I just focus on what it is that I can do. But we came out of the room, and I came out with her husband. Her husband was such a cute, gentle, really nice person. And I can remember we were in the hallway of the hospital, and he said to me with such humility, he looked at me and he said, Rosemary, can you save her sight? And of course I couldn't do anything of the kind. I'm just an instrument. And I held him, and I talked to him about the possibilities and the probabilities of different things, and I stayed very strong for him. However, he went back to his wife, and I went down the corridor to go back to the car park. As soon as I got around the corner where he couldn't see me, I just collapsed against the wall, and the tears for the anguish, for his anguish, for his pain, sort of rubbed onto me. It is not easy always to make these sacrifices, and I'm only doing it little at a time here and there. What about these people who are living their entire lives making these sacrifices? What about those people who, they need help, they need support, they need us to be strong, they need us to be there for them, even if we can't be there all the time. They need us to be there for them a little at a time. So especially as Memorial Day is coming up, I'm going to ask everybody listening to this, if you know of family who has a soldier out there fighting, or even if they're not fighting, even if they're home right now, pay attention and ask, can you help them? And for the families who might be listening, or the family who have, a caregiver dealing with an aged parent, or a sick child, or whatever it is, help these people by offering to give them a break, by offering to, make dinner for them, by whatever means you can, give them a break. And if you are the caregiver, here is our recipe. Be a little selfish with yourself. Learn to say yes when someone is, asking if they can help. Pride has no place when you're needing to feed your soul, when you're needing to take care of yourself, because if you can take care of yourself, then you can take better care of that person you are caring for. So,
So, Rosemary, we have two sides of the recipe this week, right? We have those who make the sacrifices and those sort of onlookers of the people that make the sacrifices. And just to add to what you were saying about in respect to Memorial Day, or you've people who've lost loved ones in the line of service, of really any service, right? Just if you know of those people, even dating back to 9/11, you have a friend that lost somebody at 9/11, or you have somebody that went to Afghanistan and lost a son or a daughter. Sometimes acknowledging them and saying, "Hey, I remember when."
However long ago it was.
However long ago it was, yeah.
Or pick up the phone, or send a card, or go knock on someone's door. Because let's be clear, especially with the military, especially with those doctors who work tirelessly, long hours, especially with the people who are, taking care of a parent or a child, their families are making sacrifices as well in order for them to be able to do what they're doing. For instance, you're not giving necessarily the time you want to give to your kids if you're having to take care of an aged parent. Those kids are being asked to make a sacrifice of having to have less time with their parent. Those families who have soldiers or out fighting, those families are making huge sacrifices, being without their loved ones, and always having to wonder every minute of every day, is he okay? Will she be okay? What have you? So when we are the people making sacrifices, those people who are behind us are also making sacrifices, because they're having to do without us. I know with my own daughter, when I went out to give healing, it was, she either had to come with me or go to a friend's house or whatever. But for those moments when I'm not there, she's in a small way making sacrifices. So we need to, I think, pay attention to the fact that we all do make sacrifices in one small way or another, and some of us make bigger sacrifices than others. And can we also remember, especially this weekend, can we also remember those, the unsung heroes, the people who stay quietly in the background? I'm thinking particularly of the Salvation Army, the people who go out to the food banks, not the food banks, where they go in line every week to feed the homeless. Those people who put themselves out there, they are, in my opinion, some of the unsung heroes. And if we can just acknowledge them in a small way by making our own small sacrifice. And as I've said, sacrifice is painful, but pain is the gift that we absolutely hate to be given. But it's what helps us, and it teaches us to grow.
Absolutely. Lori has another comment. She says, we show the children what love actually is exponentially and let it grow. Nettie says, I'm a care person at work and at home. I collapsed every time. Like you, balance between yourself and others seems to help. Finding that balance is key. Um, and that's pretty much all of the comments we have today. So
Okay. Well, I just want to say for everybody out there, for all of those unsung heroes, I certainly think about you all from time to time. I am a person who has made sacrifices as a mother, gladly, willingly, as a grandmother, absolutely gladly, willingly. Um, I made sacrifices for my patients, you know, it, but no big great shakes there. But as a person who makes sacrifices, I am so grateful to all of those, the families of the military, the families of the doctors and nurses, the families of the policemen out there who are protecting our streets, and all of those others. I, as a person who makes those small sacrifices, I am so grateful to all of those who make the bigger sacrifices. And I do thank the families of all of those, because they also are the unsung heroes. We think about the soldiers, we see them in uniform, men and women who go out there, but how often do we think there's a family somewhere there who are letting this person go? There's a family out there who are also sacrificing. So I just want to put it out there that we all should strive to show our appreciation in whatever way we can. And I would like to say thank you, and please, all of you, have a very safe Memorial weekend. Al, what about you?
same thing. We just acknowledge those who've made the ultimate sacrifice, especially this weekend. And if I stress, if you know somebody who's lost somebody, especially like we said in the military this weekend, give them a call. Send them a text, and just be appreciative of those men and women who've served. I mean, I can remember briefly. My grandfather served, and he was in a lot of really dangerous situations, and he survived. But if he hadn't, none of us would be here. And so that
Right.
right. So,
The same with my father, because
yeah,
I was born after the Second World War, and I certainly wouldn't be sitting here chatting away if my father hadn't made that self same sacrifice. And he was a professional soldier all of his life, and he was flown into Germany, he was in Japan, he was in the Middle East. He saw some awful things. One or two things he shared with me from time to time, but we do thank all of those who make those sacrifices for us, and specifically at this weekend, we'd like to thank all of those who are supportive of the military. And again, if you don't believe in the war, I get it. If you don't believe in fighting, I get it. But at least say thank you to those people who are keeping us safe and well while we're living our wonderful lives. Because however awful our lives are, we do in this country, certainly we have our freedom of speech. We have the freedom to be what we want to be and to do what we want to do, as long as it's legal, of course. So I would say all of you enjoy your Memorial Day. Please spend moment for all of those heroes, sung and unsung. And Al, thank you very much for being my co-host. I've had a great time. I hope you've had a great time. And until we see you again, if you want to talk about something particular, email us at info@everythingisattitude, and Al will be answering those emails. If you'd like to come on the show, of course, we'd love to have you. You don't necessarily have to be on camera. You can just be in the background there. If you need to know more about me, please email me, rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. And that's it, I think. Until we see you again next week, please, all of you, have a very, very, very blessed day.